What's up, you guys, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Fit Women's Weekly podcast. I am so excited for today because it's not just me chit chatting. I have a very special guest on today, Dr. Shainna Ali, who is a certified mental counselor and the author of Designing Healthy Boundaries. But before we jump into that, I just have to give a quick shout out and say thank you guys for all the amazing support and love from last week's episode regarding my 50K. I'm still riding high. I'm still feeling good. I'm actually just now feeling fully recovered and getting back to my routine of things. But yeah, I'm still feeling super excited about it and trying to figure out what my next steps are, what my next goals are, because that one is now marked off. But thank you guys so much for all the love. And quickly, before we jump into this special episode, I do want to just quickly say, if you love what you hear, make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel and that you comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you have any questions that you would love to have answered as a topic for a future episode, never hold back, you guys. This is our podcast, not my podcast. We are a Fit Women's Weekly community, and I want to make sure that I'm always providing the content that you guys want to hear. And if you want to support the channel even more, make sure to head over to fitwomensweekly.com and try out my online studio called Fit Women's Weekly Live. This is where I go live every single day of the week. I give 60-minute workouts and 30-minute workouts so that if you're short on time, you still have something to do. And this is not just random workouts. This is truly a fitness studio where you get to interact with me, ask me questions. Even if you don't do the workouts live, it's fine. I can give you modifications. I can give you help. I can watch how you're doing certain moves and give you certain tips on form to make sure that you are getting the most out of every exercise of every workout. And it's free to try it out. So what do you have to lose? And I will also say, if you're like, Kendall, I love you, I just can't join right now. I get it. I get that it's not always the right time for everybody. So we are currently doing a buy me a coffee. So if you do want to help support the channel, help support the brand, you can check that out. The link is down below. All right, you guys, we're going to talk about creating boundaries. We're going to talk about mental health. We're going to talk about fitness. We're going to make sure that you have the tools to get started taking better care of yourself, not just in the workouts when you are working out in the gym or at your home, but we got to take care of this too, right? So let's jump into this episode. I got your press release. I was like, yeah, this is a perfect fit because obviously I can talk fitness and nutrition all day long, but mental health is something that's equally as important, if not more so important, that doesn't get talked about very often. So I jumped at the opportunity to have you on the show. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for saying that, Kendall, because I think in terms of wellness, I really aspire to utilize a more holistic approach, not just personally, but for people that I'm sharing with too. And it's always refreshing when I hear other professionals from different dimensions of wellness also acknowledge that mental health is important, because I don't deny at all that physical health is important. So, seeing that intertwining, and I think from our level, being professionals who are working with clients, it's helpful to know that we're setting the bar for no, health comes in different forms. They all interact, and one form of health doing well can help another form of health doing even better.
Exactly. And I think especially in my field, people look at it as I'm exercising to get rid of my anxiety and get rid of my depression. And that is part of it. Absolutely. But that's only one part. And there's so much more that you need to stay cognizant and aware of in order to have a balanced, healthy lifestyle that goes beyond just the fitness.
Absolutely. It's a great start to that. And I often have people start there. Yet what happens when it's not enough, right? Like, what are the next steps?
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, if people turn too much towards physical fitness when they're first starting to take on their mental habits, it can almost become an addiction because you're having to work a little bit harder to get those endorphins going. So what started off as like something healthy to help you be in a healthy mindset can sometimes go overboard because you're always having to go run that extra mile to get that high that you were starting to get at the beginning.
There's absolutely that. And also there can be a discouraging thing at the end of the day, right? So I'm running all of these miles every single day. I'm lifting all this weight every other day. Nothing is changing in terms of my overall mental health. And it can cause the person to be discouraged. Yet the exercise is great. It's just that it's not missing the exact mark of what's going on. There is something that needs to be talked about or addressed.
Right. Absolutely. Now I want to make sure that I'm correct. It's Dr. Shainna, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, how did you get into the field? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
So I got into the field based on my personal experiences, actually. So, I did not always grow up thinking I'd be a therapist. I did not know what that meant, even. I think for a lot of years, I had a really misleading, perhaps stereotypical version of what that meant. But it was in college that I started to learn about my own anxiety and even come to terms with like what anxiety is.
Mm-hmm.
And in working through that, I really opened my eyes to the counseling and psychology field, and felt like there was this missing piece that clicked in for me that I was really grateful for at the time, which caused me to veer into that direction for my career. Now, fast forward when I got my master's degree and I started practicing, I was grateful to be doing the work that I was doing. Yet I realized, wow, so many more people need this extra click that happened for me, and I was so lucky to have. And that made me go back to school and want to be a counselor educator. Fast forward past that, I really appreciate being a counselor educator. Yet I think that counselor education and mental health awareness shouldn't be only taught to people who are professionals. I think every single one of us has mental health and the responsibility of cultivating mental wellness. So I am really passionate these days about meeting people at the individual or small group level to help them understand how they can better foster their mental health too.
How have you seen the change in the stigma of working with a counselor change over the past, I don't know how long you've been doing it, but I would say the past decade? It's really,
Yeah,
because when
I've
I
been
was a kid, or when I was 15 when I was diagnosed with anxiety, and at the time there's the stigma that I was weak. I was, it was something that you didn't share with your friends because it was an embarrassment. And that's one thing that I've truly appreciated over just the past few years, is being able to openly communicate that, and people being able to express themselves a little bit more to be able to get help easier.
Yeah. So you mentioned about a decade, and thanks so much for sharing about your experience too, because I have been in practice for a decade, but I've been living with anxiety for longer. So I relate to you very much of, especially when I mentioned like a childhood version of me wouldn't have said they wanted to be a therapist because it was like, no, I'm not working with those type of people, right? I had
Right.
all those stigmatized beliefs I had internalized. And I think it was kept keeping me even more anxious. So in general, I am really pleased to recognize that lots of people, whether they're in my office or beyond, I'm seeing growth of people not just seeing mental health as illness, but recognizing this pervasiveness of wellness. Yet a lot of those views, like mental health means that you're weak, you're not working hard enough, like you need to exercise more, like all of these things that make it a minimized, easy problem to handle. And it's just as simple as willpower. All those really pejorative thoughts around mental health still exist, unfortunately. So I'm seeing a lot of people who have positive views of mental health and are trying really hard to work on their mental health. Yet there's these views of like, well, my mom doesn't agree, my dad doesn't agree, my partner doesn't agree, my faith community may be preaching something else. And it's that societal realm that I just hope that over time, if we continue in this direction, we all get on board and it just becomes a numbers game. The more we talk about our mental health and specifically well-being, I think that that will continue to change.
What tips can you give somebody who really wants to talk to a counselor, knows that it would benefit them, but maybe their spouse is somebody that's like, that's stupid. You don't need, you have me to talk to. Why do you need to go talk to somebody else? Or family members, like you said, or a lot of like cultures, depending on where you're coming from, also find that stigma of like, you don't need to go talk to somebody, keep family stuff in the family or personal issues to yourself. So how would you suggest someone going to talking to their significant other or family to say, this is what I need to do?
Yeah, so sometimes I like to treat that in a numbers way, because when people are not considering all of the emotional, social, relational aspects of things, they might be thinking about things as like hard numbers and biases. And the way I like to treat that is, statistics vary, but somewhere between like 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 people live with an active mental health condition. So just because we're not seeing it doesn't mean that someone's not living with it. So when we break it down that way and start looking at what signs of a mental health problem look like, then we realize like more people are dealing with this than not. And it's not that I'm trying to get help because I don't love, appreciate, trust someone else, fill in the blank. It's because I care about you and I care about me too, that I want to make sure that I'm better. Many times I use that mental and physical health parallel of, if someone said to you that they were diagnosed with cancer, I have a really hard time thinking about someone shaming them, blaming them, saying, how dare you go see a doctor for this? And the reality is mental health, especially severe mental health conditions, are not much different in terms of the effect on the body, in terms of stress, inflammation, what have you. And of course, in terms of lethality as well. So those are some methods, but another way is, you don't have to do that alone. I think about community organizations like the National Alliance on Mental Illness, that there are support groups, mental health associations locally, that you can find some resources, or maybe some of these like small workshops that people will talk about it. So you don't have to be the crusader who's also trying to do better and informing people too. I hope that with time, the more we inform people about the truth about mental wellness, and that we all have it and we all have the responsibility of fostering it, that will get easier over time.
Absolutely. I think that it is definitely going in that right direction. And maybe it's just because I surround myself with people like us, right? So, but I still feel like it's definitely reaching out, and I think it's only going to get better over time. Which I think is just a great segue into kind of talking a little bit about, you just released your book, Designing Healthy Boundaries, a guide to embracing self-love, building better boundaries, and protecting your peace. And what really drew me to wanting to chit chat with you was women. I think that women have such a hard time drawing boundaries. So what inspired you to write this book? And let's talk about healthy boundaries a little bit.
Absolutely. So I noticed that I see boundaries just slightly different than I think the average person. And that was like the first impetus to even consider writing something about it. It was in my personal work as a woman, right? But a lot of other intersections that make boundary setting a little challenging for me. And then seeing it come up in a lot of my clients' work too. So anytime that happens for me, I then get really drawn to kind of share and educate with other people. Just because I learned something and just because my clients benefit doesn't mean we have to keep it secret. It's like, let's share that. I think when we're growing with our mental wellness, we can help other people too. And that's where the boundaries work came from. I concur with you that it's really challenging for a lot of people. It's particularly challenging for women. I think a lot of the roles we're told of societally, what it means to be a woman, means that you are not having boundaries in some way. I think about, the role of the devoted daughter, the sister, the mother, the wife, what have you, even just, the female friend. Even that is, a lot of this is you're over giving and you're not actually building a boundary from someone else. And I think those are misunderstandings of what a boundary is.
That's what I was going to ask. What do you define? What is a boundary? Is it the ability to say no? Is it deeper than that?
So I think it's deeper than that, but sometimes it can look like the ability to say no. I think that is a branch of it. But put simply, I see boundaries as limits we set to protect ourselves and others. I think sometimes people will see the former part of that, but the and others is, I think, what we're missing a lot of the times. In the method I utilize with boundary setting, I try to empower the individual to see how setting boundaries personally, first with yourself, but even the practice of setting a boundary with someone else, is actually a really self-loving practice. It shows that you recognize that you are worthy and you are showing yourself respect by setting that boundary. Also, when you learned to be conscientious, flexible, yet disciplined about your own boundaries, you set the best example for other people about how they can interact with you and what your boundaries look like too. And even in the worst scenario in which our boundaries are violated in a particularly dangerous way, I think at the end of the day, it still comes back to how we treat ourselves in terms of healing. So how do we re-heal that boundary on a personal level? So I believe that boundaries are all very personal, even when they're interpersonal, that they can be built with love, and at least love for yourself, but potentially love for other people too, because boundaries don't always have to be a system of defense. They can be a method of collaboration.
And what do you mean by that?
So I think a lot of times when we think about boundaries, we think about walls, right? Like walls, blockades.
I'm not going to I'm not going to reply to a business email after 6 p.m.
Right. And even like the language, right? Like I'm not, right? And earlier you used the example of saying no, right? So it means like out, get out, like there's this blockade. And please don't get me wrong. There are many times that that firm no protection is needed. Yet I also encourage people to think about, what are you permitting, right? So this is what you don't want to permit, but in the, what are you saying no to? It's, what are you saying yes to? What do you want to receive? What do you want to allow? And seeing that helps you to know what you're protected, or what you are protecting. That's when our boundaries are a bit more firm and they're more aligned with us. Yet there are sometimes we're trying to build a boundary to better connect with someone else, right? To improve our communication, to improve our love. I think, especially when we have a friend, a partnership, a child, anything, a team, we want the boundary to protect us all. So in that way, it's not just, don't speak to me this way. It's, in here, this is the language that we speak with, right? We speak to one another with kindness and respect. That's a boundary too. But you see how that's more collaborative. There is more buy-in from multiple people. No one is necessarily being ousted in that. It's, this is the boundary that we're building to keep us all safe together too.
And if a boundary is not met, what's the best way to handle that situation where it's like, okay, this is the way that we talk in this house. And if for some reason something happens where that boundary is not being met, how can you, without blowing up, having a temper tantrum to your significant other or your family member, handle that situation and get back to your line of where your boundary was drawn?
Well, I appreciate this example because even in that shows, like, usually where our brains go for boundaries is the interpersonal, right? When our boundaries aren't met, and it sounds like what you were meaning by that is when our boundaries are not met by someone else. Right. And that is many times where we see the boundaries, and those are valid. Yet before we consider how our boundaries are seen with other people, we need to first have full clarity on what our boundaries are in terms of what we're protecting, why we're protecting them, what they mean to us, and how we are abiding by them. So to continue to go with this example of an interpersonal thing, like say in a household, one partner says something that the other partner finds to be like mean. Let's just keep it simple as that, right? So to use my route of, okay, well, first come back to yourself and make sure we're on the same page of, are you even abiding by your boundary? If you are the type of person who's constantly using like self-deprecating humor, and you're also being mean when you're speaking to yourself or to other people, then now you're asking someone to abide by a boundary that, yeah, maybe you even verbalized, don't say this, but you're not honoring internally. So I use that example first as an opportunity for us to, before we put blame on anyone else, because we can't control other people, is to come back to, what can I manage? What is it within my wheelhouse that I can be accountable and responsible for and say I can manage? Now, say that is not the case. This person uses respectful language. They've worked on that to themselves, but yet someone is still kind of breaching their boundary in that way. Then it's coming back to that of revisiting and reclarifying the boundary, especially if it's in a relationship that is comfortable. So what's going on here? Because I understand that this is my boundary and this is what I felt breached in this way. This is my experience of it. Sharing that conversation. And it's also helpful to know, like, what are the limits? What are the consequences? What are the plans moving forward? And that can be a helpful route as well.
So I also think that women, a lot of times, like we were kind of talking about trying to be the perfect wife and the mother, it's been put upon us that that's a state of pride almost, right? It's like, I can balance everything. And it's not even women, it's anybody really in this world in today's society, because more of us are also working from home. And a lot of us have adopted or tried to adopt, because not very many people can, the whole Gary Vaynerchuk philosophy, if you know who Gary V is, where it's you hustle, you work for, 23 out of 24 hours, and you find pride in that until finally you break down. And at some point you have to have that feeling of, oh my God, I have to do something about this. So when you start to have that mental breakdown, where do you even begin to sit down and say, where do I need to start in order to realign my life with self-love and start drawing boundaries?
It's so hard because the recovering perfectionist in me is like, oh, that sounds great. Let's keep hustling. Like, let's get things accomplished. Let's
Same,
let's check
sure.
off all the things, right? I
Yeah,
hear
I could
that.
totally do
And
that.
and where I am now, the philosophy that I live my life from, the philosophy that I use to help people in their wellness journey is I just don't believe that that works. I believe that it's that type of mindset that, while well intentioned, it causes burnout culture, and
Yeah,
it causes a lot of internalized like shaming and toxicity, because then it's like, why can't I? Because other people can. What's wrong with me?
right.
I've only seen a cascade of mental health issues from that. So it's a big part of my personal journey to shift from that hustle
Hmm.
paradigm. I have a lot of respect for people who are in a survival state that they do not believe that they can abandon that hustle mindset.
Hmm.
But I've had to do a lot of rewiring personally and professionally to help people realize you cannot have all of your wellness domains checked off perfectly at every given time. It is just impossible.
Yeah,
And even I'm saying that, and I'm like reminding myself, no, no, you can't. There's a little
same.
voice that says, are you sure? Are you
I
sure?
actually have
Because
I have goosebumps because this speaks to me so much that I'm the
yeah.
same way. And when I first started working for
Yeah.
myself, we would hear Gary Vee or whoever it was give these talks about you have to work, and you'd be so motivated. And then
Yeah.
as someone with me who ended up with shingles twice in a 6 month period, it's like, oh, maybe you gotta
Maybe
chill.
the
Maybe this isn't the life
yeah.
that you can keep up for the next 40 years of your life.
And Kendall, my heart breaks for people who end up having these glaring signs of burnout and don't make the connection
Mhm.
between, oh, it is this maybe this method does not work for me. And
Right.
I understand the heartbreak in that too, because I think the world, especially here in the States, our culture is to keep going, go, 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 go. But that it's a moving target a lot, and it
Hmm.
causes this lack of fulfillment, many times a lack of intentionality. So it sometimes becomes a little mind warp of, if I'm stopping or if I'm slowing, I don't want to say stopping because I don't think it's that, but if I'm slowing down, does it mean that I'm quitting? Does it mean I'm giving up? Does it
Right.
mean I don't care about these things or who I am? And I don't think it has to go, this or that, black and white. But I think we're in a world, in a society, in an era, in a culture that is very hustle oriented, and then we see people propagating that it is possible,
Hmm.
that it seems like it is, so we try
Right.
to shoot for the moon, but when we don't even land amongst the stars because you're shooting for the moon,
You
we
get
end
thrown
up
down real fast.
yeah, and it's a hard fall. So even when I hear that, I think it's a big paradigm shift. So when you ask the question of like, where do you start, it is kind of recognizing that that's not even the right paradigm that you're operating with. And
Mhm.
sometimes that means going back to the drawing board altogether and shifting the way we see things.
Mhm. I've also learned from my own personal experience, when you try to take on the world of everything, you end up resenting everyone else around you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is no way to live either. As someone who is someone that I can run the household, I can run a business, I can do all of these things. Eventually, I looked at my husband and I was like, I hate you. Like, and that's
Yeah,
such a hard thing.
yeah.
And it wasn't any of his doing, it was because I was taking on everything. So he didn't have to do those things. But by him not doing those things, eventually I'd be like, can't you just wash a freaking dish?
Sure,
But
sure.
after 18 years together, I had put it on myself, like, I'm the good wife who can wash the dishes, you know? So, and I know that I'm not alone. I know that a lot of my readers, which is why I'm so open and these experiences. I mean, where do you go? Like, do you start with journaling? Or do you kind of pick an area of your life of, I know I need to set boundaries? For example, like my husband and I sat down a few weeks ago with this exact conversation to start
Mhm.
drawing out a little bit of boundaries of, I need you to do this, I will do this, to make it easier on one another. But what can other
Yeah.
people do to get started?
Well, I think that even if everyone was just listening intently to you, they hear actually part of the process that I suggest is
Mm-hmm.
there usually is this reckoning, and we hope that the reckoning doesn't happen so burnt out, so resentful, but that's when it happens for a lot of us, right?
Right.
Like it
It's
has
that
to be
aha
glaring.
moment, the boiling pot of enough is enough.
Unfortunately, that's the truth, is that we see it there. And part of my hope with this book is that we'll start to see it sooner so we can prevent that from having to be such a catastrophizing situation,
Right.
and we can see it sooner. But what I heard you say from that is you realize, like, well, when I sat with that, I was resentful towards him, interpersonal,
Mhm.
because of what I put on me.
Right.
Right. So you hear that personal boundary nestled in or projected towards the interpersonal. So what I suggest for people to do, I do think journaling is great. The book is designed to help you do this, to
Okay.
start from, okay, where then? Like, where do I start? I recognize I play a part in this. And some of these boundaries, even if they are interpersonal, I'm a part of that boundary, right? At the end
Right.
of the day. So it prompts you with some core questions, such as what's important to you, how do you find balance, so you can better gauge, like, what are your boundaries. It
Mhm.
sounds like, if I would make a jump from what you've shared with us, is maybe some of the boundaries figuring out, like, what does it mean to be a mother in this household, what does it mean to be a wife in this household, what does it mean to be a business owner, like, what are these things,
Right.
like, that is what I need to refine for myself first before I can even get anyone else involved, right? Well, a life partner, a business partner, a neighbor, before we even start to think about our boundaries with other people, having a solid footing for ourselves is really helpful. So if you don't have the book, I do think that journaling in general is a great place to start. Sometimes people are skeptical about journaling because they're like, oh, I'm having all these thoughts anyway. There's so much literature that proves it's different when the thoughts are swirling around in your head and you think you're making a lot of sense
Mhm.
versus the accountability you can give yourself by writing it out. Talking it out too. Obviously, I suggest speaking with a mental health professional, but
Mhm.
if that's not accessible, talking it out with a loved one. So, like you mentioned, like sitting at the table with your husband to discuss this. Sometimes it doesn't mean we're figuring out the boundary right now. It's
Right.
let's discuss what this boundary has looked like, what has not worked for us, what we imagine could work for us. The boundary does not need to be set like the same moment you realize it's important.
And I think that's so
Sometimes it
important, is that people think like, if there's something that needs to be battled out in a relationship, let's say, it has to be done right there. But just like so many other things in our life, it's a step-by-step process.
Yes, it absolutely is a step-by-step process. And taking that more process approach is a big part of the designing healthy boundaries journey, because I think that, yes, sometimes there are times that we have to impulsively scaffold something really quickly. And that means it works for us in that very specific moment. But what we're trying to do is build boundaries that last us for a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the process of building it, revisiting it, fine tuning it, adjusting it. I use the metaphor of when we're using a car, most of us, I'd like to think, don't buy a car thinking we never have to do anything to it, right? Like
Unfortunately,
never.
no.
And we know that's the truth, right? There's some things that require lots of maintenance, but we don't think twice about it. I mean, our teeth, most of us brush our teeth every day, right? We're not like, yeah, it's sure, it takes time out of our day. And when you're using hustle culture, you really need that time, right?
Right.
But with that being said, we know why. It's really intentional. And that's a boundary we keep with ourselves to keep ourselves healthier. I'm hoping that over time, all of these boundaries feel just like that. Okay, I know it takes time, but boy, that time is worth it.
Right. What's the difference between a non-negotiable and a boundary?
So I actually see a non-negotiable as a firm version of a boundary.
Okay.
And I highlight that there are many non-negotiables. Non-negotiables look different from person to person. And it's because of that is why boundary conversations are so important,
Mhm.
is for someone, like using a relationship example, I often use the whole, like, what is cheating question, right? Because for someone, a non-negotiable
I
is
don't think that
do
answer will
not.
ever, or that question will ever have a full answer.
But yet that's an area where we need boundaries a lot,
Right.
right? So it is that really challenging aspect of, okay, a non-negotiable for me is being flirty and exchanging nice comments and words with someone that you might be attracted, feeling whatever that is,
Right.
right? Maybe that is that way for someone else, and someone's like, are you like, this is how I speak. That's not a non-negotiable for me, right?
Right.
So a non-negotiable though then means well, if you don't see it this way, and this is really important to who I am, I'm feeling safe, then we
Gotcha.
can either come to some sort of compromise, or this means this is not, if we can't negotiate a boundary here, then this is not the relationship, the
Right.
dynamic that is important for us right now. It's not
Mhm.
a healthy dynamic, which means a healthy boundary is not possible, and vice versa.
Gotcha.
Now, I will share that the most common non-negotiables are more safety oriented, right?
Mhm.
Like they're danger prone. Like the non-negotiable is do not drive this car when you are inebriated, right? Like
Right.
do not hit, do not, all of these things. Usually we can get on the same page with those type of non-negotiables. And I
Mhm.
share that because people get really scared about having conversations about non-negotiables, but there's a difference between this, without a doubt, no matter what, this is firm for me, versus I feel strongly about
Mhm.
this, yet in certain contexts I have some wiggle room. Then that's not non-negotiable. That's
Right.
not it. That means that it is something you're passionate about, it is important to you, but it's not non-negotiable.
Gotcha. That makes absolute sense. And then I know a
Mhm.
big part of, because I know that we're already starting to run out of time, but I know a big part of your book is all about self-love as well, like setting your boundaries for self-love. And you mentioned the 7 segments of self-love. So
Mhm.
what does that mean? What are the 7 segments of self-love?
Yeah, and I think it's important for listeners to understand that the self-love workbook came out of my work before designing healthy boundaries. And that's where a lot of my work has been for when I think about mental wellness, and something that is important for everyone is this ability to treat yourself with the same loving kindness that you would someone you deeply love. Not anymore, but definitely not any less, just at least the same. And the 7 segments that come out of that are self-awareness, self-exploration, self-care, self-esteem, self-kindness, self-respect, put an asterisk in that one, and self-growth. Self-respect is where I believe boundaries grow out of. So it's the self-respect, which is a version of self-love, that we set boundaries with ourselves and with others. The self-love workbook has been really helpful in my personal journey and in my journey with my clients. And I think it's a really wonderful place to start if you're trying to work on mental well-being. Yet I realized this section I had on boundaries, it was just the beginning for many of us. So that's where designing healthy boundaries came from. So the relationship there is that designing healthy boundaries came out of the self-love workbook. And I believe when we're designing healthy boundaries, it just fuels right back in our ability to love ourselves and other people.
Absolutely. What are some, like, the ones that, I mean, all of those obviously stick out, but self-respect, if someone
Mm.
heard that word and goes, oh, automatically, right? What are some instant ways that they can kind of start working on one of the segments of self-love, just using the self-respect as an example?
Sure. So, self respect, I think a helpful area for anyone to start is to think about your core values. This is a cornerstone in understanding what respect looks like for you. And you can even, if it seems a little intimidating to put that self aspect,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it is helpful to look at it more externally because it feels more familiar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I really value trust. I really value, um, learning, whatever the arbitrary value is. And in the self-love workbook and in designing healthy boundaries, there are both some like value words there to kind of prompt anyone's thoughts if they're drawing blanks. But then that helps you to know what are your strong core values and what are, I've started to call them your anti-values. So I think it's just as important to know like the thing that gives you the ick. Like
I
I know
just
that
had
one of the
Taylor
values.
Swift come to mind as soon as you said that. Oh my God, that woman has way too much power in this world. And automatically you say anti, and I'm like, anti-hero? What?
That is so funny. I need to figure out my wording, but contra value, I don't know. But my point is, what is so loaded for us on the opposite end, too? Like
Mhm.
in the self love workbook, one of the values I have listed there is fame. And some people have had that as a value. And a lot of people have been like, ugh, that is like, I want nothing to do that. That's just like a strong, like put 3 negative signs by that.
Right. Mhm.
But that's a loaded thing to know, like what you need to protect yourself from then, right? Like you don't want a lifestyle then that supports that for you because it's not aligned with who you are. So when you know your values, both your contra values, I'm now renaming them for the
No, no,
purpose of
no, because it will stay. At least people will know, like, it sticks. No, you're going to keep it
Sure.
anti-values for sure.
And your core values. It helps you to better align. So that's a good place to start if you're wanting to work on your self-respect.
If you are starting to try to just work on yourself in general, you've mentioned the self-love book as well as the balance book, or boundaries book. Which one do you recommend people starting with?
I always recommend starting with a self-love
Okay.
workbook
That's what I
because
was feeling.
and it's again aligned with the same paradigm that the Designing Healthy Boundaries book is built upon, because you have to start from yourself first. Now, like I understand that not everyone can say I have that disposable income to go get both books and work about on them in order. The Designing Healthy Boundaries book does have a decent section on self-love, so you can still work with that. Just heed my guidance that it's healthier to lay that foundation of self-love before trying to build healthy boundaries. But life, right? Like who's gonna seclude themselves in a bubble to get to read all these books and do all the things? I understand that life is coming at you and you probably see some boundary things that are glaring that you want to jump in and get on. That's fine too. Start wherever you need to. You know the answer for you. You're probably thinking about things in your life right now. It's like, I hear you, Dr. Shainna. I see how self-love's important and I want to. This person and their boundaries, we've got to work on that.
Right.
And that's okay. Then start there. That's okay. Then that's most prominent for you. Start there. Just please caution overlooking and not returning to that solid foundation at some time. You're going to have to do that to make sure you scaffold yourself and you're empowered to design these healthy boundaries.
As we're just kind of working through, going through a workbook or journaling that we discussed earlier, is there any science that backs up whether it's best to do self-care like these kind of processes in the morning, afternoon, evening? Is there any association with when?
So in my method with my clients, I actually have them try at different times of day. I have them lead first with what they know. And I'm just a firm believer, like no matter what any expert, you, myself, anyone else knows, the person is the expert in themselves if they lean into that. Some people know they're listening. They're probably like, I've got 2 cups of coffee and I'm still not awake yet, right? Like that type of feeling.
Right.
Then listen to that. Maybe that means that you're not alert until later on in the afternoon or perhaps right before bed. And that can be used to unwind and dump your brain out before getting some quality rest. Some people wake up, they're like, this is my time. The house is silent. The neighborhood is quieter. This is my time for me. You know your truth. So it really depends on the person. I find that a marriage between the two is really helpful. If you can create a habit of kind of checking in with yourself in the morning and the night, that is ideal to me because there's so much fluctuation in a given day that it's really helpful to notice that pattern. And honestly, Kendall, even that, the pattern of tracking morning and night and seeing which one is better for you over time, that's self-loving too.
Yeah, because you're collecting data on yourself. That's really cool. It's kind of the same thing that I tell clients when they're like, should you work out in the morning or the afternoon? And I tell them, you work out when the right time for you to work out is. If you're trying, of course, science says if you work out first thing in the morning, you burn a higher percentage of fat.
Sure.
If you're still asleep or you don't want to wake up, don't worry about it. The best time is when you're able to stay consistent with it. Or at the same time, like if you know when you get off of work, you're in a really crappy mood because you've been stuck in traffic, that's probably not the best time to really dig within yourself and ask yourself personal questions to journal.
Absolutely. And like self-care comes in different forms, right? So we've talked a lot about the workbooks and the wider practice of journaling. Yet there may be like in that you get home from work, you're overwhelmed, you're exhausted, you want to do things, but you cannot in that moment. Then self-love in that moment probably looks like rest, taking a breath. Maybe it's a walk instead of weight training, right? Like whatever it is, that's what self-love looks like then. It doesn't mean, sometimes we build up the ideal self-love practice. We're like, oh, I bought this workbook and I want to use it. And kudos to everyone who's going to follow through with that. Don't get me wrong. And it's okay if I don't have the time or the energy to open this up and dig deep right now. I don't think that's the best for me right now. And I need to go for a walk. I need to get outside and get some sun. I need to drink double up on my water today because I'm dehydrated. That's also self-love, right? Mm-hmm. So knowing that and refining that practice is going to be more important than any one task.
Absolutely. Now, like I said, I know that we're getting ready to come to a close, but I have to ask you personally, what is one or two things that you do on your daily regimen that is 100% just for you?
So I do a lot of breathing pauses. And in terms of regimen, I am trying to follow my lead more of when I recognize I need it. And that's usually when I'm feeling dysregulated, overwhelmed, my mind is running all over the place. I'm really trying to do that a lot. I think we do not recognize the power of our breath. And if you just took 60 seconds to just tune in and breathe deeply, it's been life-changing for me. That's one. Building on top of that, I love yoga. I am a different human being when I am practicing yoga and when I do not get the time to practice. And I'll add that I love doing yoga by myself, but going to a class, I think just as a type A person who tends to lead lots of things, it is a nice surrendering practice. Yes. When someone else has come up with something. Sure. I think that's part of it. So yoga is a big one for me. I do love to journal. And a lot of people ask me and are surprised to hear when I use my own books. And I always find that funny. Like, why wouldn't I use my
That's so funny. Yeah.
And I'm like, of course, I built it off of a method that worked for me that I wanted to share with other people. But the resource is there. And I believe that it's something that needs to be worked on over time. So I use my own books too, of course.
Hey, there you go. I mean, you got to pimp yourself out. If it doesn't work for you, how's it going to work for other people?
Yeah, I know. It's just so funny. People are like, really? You use them? And I think that comes from this idea of mental health as something you achieve and you're done with. And I believe that mental health, just like physical health, right? There is no one workout that we can do. That means we're done. Like, that's it. No workout for the rest of my life.
I'm strong enough. I got the muscles. I'm done.
What a fascinating concept that would be, right? But
somebody has actually asked me that before. Oh, once you can, I think the question was like, once you can squat a certain weight, can you stop working out? Man, I wish that I would be rich if I could come up with a training program like that.
Yeah. And I think it is that idea of like, we treat a lot of things in our world as like checkbox move forward. And there are a lot of other things, especially when it comes to health and well-being, that need to be integrated in our lives forever, like brushing our teeth, like working out, and like self-love.
And you're always going to be learning more stuff, just like with anything, fitness, nutrition. What works for you 5 years ago may not be what you're doing now. And you're always going to be learning new techniques to make yourself love yourself more.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you do box breathing?
I do. I love box breathing. Yeah, box breathing. I'm a very visual person, so it's very helpful to do box breathing. I've also found, I actually had posted a reel on Instagram over the holidays. I was wrapping gifts. And I'm like, oh, this is a nice reminder as I have all of these boxes to do my box breathing. So every time I would pull up a box, I'm like, okay, box breathing. And I'm running my finger along the sides. I love box breathing and adapting box breathing. So
that's fantastic. Well, Dr. Shainna, where can people find your book and find more about you? Because I know you also have a podcast. So please give a shout out to where everybody can get everything.
Thanks. So if you're interested in the information we shared just generally, I do have a podcast called the Mental Wellness Practice Podcast. We talk about boundaries, mental wellness over there, self-love. So that's a really great resource if you're just starting to dip your toes in. If you're wanting to delve deeper, the self-love workbook for teens, the kids book, the self-love planner, and the newly released Designing Healthy Boundaries book are all available where books are sold. Most people pick them up on Amazon or at Barnes & Noble. And if you want to find me, you can reach out at drshainna.com, or if you're on Instagram, that's where you'll find me the most out of the social platforms, at Dr. Shainna.
I love that you have a unique spelling to your name, as I do, so that you're able to like claim your name as your handle for things. And I'll make sure to link everything you guys down in the show notes and in the podcast. But if you're listening, you're like, I just want to be able to go. It's Shainna.
Yep. Thank you.
Awesome. Because I have to do the same thing. Everyone's like, Kendall,
Yeah.
Kendel, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, but thanks, Mom, for giving me that.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful. And I think it's nice to not be confused with a device that's very
Exactly.
popular, right? So
Well, I was around way before the device, but yes, absolutely.
it's so
Very
funny because I think about like people naming kids and like it's not you don't know what thing will be named what anymore.
right.
I think about everyone who's been named Alexa or like something that sounds like Siri. I'm just like, man.
Yeah, I mean Siri is Siri Cruise. That is a popular
Yeah.
name before Siri came out. Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much for hanging out with me today. It was a joy to talk to you. You just have a beautiful smile. For those of you guys watching on YouTube, you can check Dr. Shainna out, but you are a joy to talk to. So thank you for giving me some time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your willingness to recognize that health is more than just physical. There's so many
Oh,
dimensions,
absolutely.
and mental wellness is a big part of that. So thanks for letting me talk about
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. And if you ever need a trainer on your podcast, I'm your girl.
Yeah, I'll reach out. Thanks so
Absolutely.
much.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Have a great day. And that is a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys enjoyed listening to Dr. Ali, I will make sure to put the link down below so you can go check out her website, check out her books, get started journaling on your own projects to make sure that you are the healthiest you can be up here so that you can be the healthiest in all other areas of your life. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you like this video. Head over to fitwomensweekly.com. Let's try out Fit Women's Weekly Live, see what it's all about, and I'll have all the links down below with also other ways that you can help support the brand and the channel. All right, you guys, thank you. See you next week. Bye.